everyone. Thanks for joining us again today. We have another exciting show, Legal Issues Today. I'd like to thank all of our Facebook friends. I'd like to thank those folks out in Mississippi who keep sending me these notes. I like that you listen to our show and maybe you could change some of your thought process. Also, the folks that listen to us live locally, we will take call in at the typical number 317-239-1310. We'll take a few calls today. But today I'd like to introduce my all-star panel, starting with Milton Grimes, who is one of the world's famous attorneys. Milton anchored into our legal system the video with the Rodney King case. And then we have John Sweeney, one of the top trial lawyers in America. John exposed to widespread corruption in the LA Sheriff Department, went viral. And then attorney Benita Bank, past president of the National Bar Association. She's our superstar researcher and keeps us on track on so many different programs. Now today we have an exciting show. We're gonna talk about this continuation of this series of police misconduct. We have a lawyer who's well respected in the legal community, David Lane. He's been a practicing attorney for 40 years. He's got a fascinating practice though. He practiced in 1983 litigation and death penalty cases, a rare combination. I suspect that his life is always in turmoil dealing with death penalty cases. And but he had one of the more fascinating cases that we have seen. And we're going to talk about this and let David explain to you what happened to his clients there in Colorado. And we're going to walk you through the process and then we'll comment on it. Attorney Lane, tell us about your clients. What happened?
Well, I represent currently Brittany Gilliam and her daughter, her sister, and two of her nieces. My law firm, Kilmer Lane and Newman, also represents the family of Elijah McClain, who I'm sure all of you know about. The same agency that murdered Elijah McClain allegedly found got a dispatch saying that there was a stolen vehicle in Aurora, Colorado. And this was based on artificial intelligence. A license plate reader allegedly reads everybody's plates, and this one came up as stolen. They, at that point, Brittany and her family were out for a fun day of getting their nails done. They were in a parking lot. They were legally parked. They checked to see if the salon they wanted to go to was open. It was not. So they were sitting there scrolling through their phones looking for another salon that might be open when one of the kids said, the police are behind us. They've got their guns on us. And Brittany looked up and this officer came over with his gun out, pulled everybody out of the car and demanded that Brittany cuff up. So they handcuffed Brittany. They put all the kids ages 6, 10, 12, and 17 on the ground, face down on hot pavement. And I'm sure you've seen the videos of these kids, especially the 6-year-old, screaming and crying for Brittany. Brittany was put into the back of a police car, and the police wouldn't tell her why they were doing all this. Finally, one of the cops said, well, this is a stolen car. She said, this isn't a stolen car. All you have to do is check my registration. You can see it. You haven't asked me for my license or registration. Cop wasn't interested. And she hears over the dispatch, car is cleared, car is cleared. And she said, let me go, let me go. And they said no. And they huddled together. The kids were still on the ground. 2 of the kids were cuffed. The 6-year-old couldn't get cuffed because she was too little. The cuffs wouldn't fit, but she was crying and screaming, and they were held at gunpoint on the ground by Aurora police for several more minutes. They were finally released. They were held on scene for another 2 hours until a sergeant and a lieutenant could show up, and the lieutenant apparently apologized. The chief of police ultimately said, oh, well, we're sorry this happened, but they were following protocol. So I've reached out to Aurora to see if they want to talk about settling this case prior to filing. And they said, no, we're not willing to talk about it. Go ahead and file. So we're preparing a complaint to file in court now.
Got a quick question, Attorney Lane. All these lawyers on this panel, we've done all kind of trials in these 1983 cases. The first thing when I saw this, you know, we've subpoenaed all these records and taken thousands of depositions, but the one thing that struck out to me is that when a vehicle is reported stolen, the database describes what the vehicle is. And in this case here, it was a motorcycle, right?
That is correct.
So,
Not only was it a motorcycle, it was allegedly a stolen motorcycle from Montana. I personally am very suspicious that that is even true. I cannot imagine when you have 3 letters and 3 numbers on every license plate that the odds of there being a match to any license plate anywhere in America are very, very remote. I want to see it and we'll get the discovery when we file.
well, the other thing that concerns me about this is that when they get these transmission, the data will give some description of it, you know, when records I've subpoenaed. And I was curious, under your laws in Colorado, are you allowed to get like a public record request where you get things within 7 days, or do you have to file suit?
Yes, there's a Colorado Open Records Act. And we have what's called CORA. We've CORA'd everything. We will get everything once we file. It's very interesting also that in response to George Floyd's murder, the Colorado legislature this year passed what I believe to be the most sweeping civil rights statute in the country. It's better than the federal statute because it eliminates a pernicious concept called qualified immunity. And it also puts the cops' pocketbooks on the line if they are found to have willfully violated the Constitution. The officers themselves have to reach into their own pockets and pay up to $25,000 of any settlement or judgment. So it's a great new law, and nobody's ever filed under that law yet. And so Brittany Gilliam's case will probably be the first.
Well, you email a copy of that law to me because we need that in Indiana. But
everybody around the country
needs for David.
Everybody in the country needs this law. It's a
yeah, absolutely.
law.
Oh, Milton, do you have a question?
I think I've met this gentleman before. I'm not sure. His face looks awful familiar.
Well, you look awfully familiar to me too.
Yeah.
So I'm sure somewhere at some conference, somehow, somewhere, we've crossed paths.
How did they think that the children were dangerous?
Well, you would think common sense would have prevailed, wouldn't you? I mean, there is case law out there from the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers Colorado, that says it's really per se unreasonable. It's an unreasonable violation of the Fourth Amendment to hold guns on small children. I mean, there is no conceivable justification for holding a gun on a 6-year-old. Right. I mean, that's so outrageously over the top that it's really beyond debate. But these are RoboCops, apparently. You know, and what their excuse is as well. A stolen car is a high-risk felony stop. And when you have a high-risk felony stop, everybody's taken out of the car, put down at gunpoint, cuffed, and then you sort it out. But at some point, common sense has to prevail. And it didn't in Aurora. It never does in Aurora. Aurora is a frequent flyer on Kilmer Lane and Newman's radar. We have sued Aurora for decades, and the city council keeps writing checks, and they wring their hands, and they cluck their tongues, and they shrug their shoulders and say, I don't know why these cops keep doing this. And the answer is because Internal Affairs is a whitewash committee that does nothing but exonerate cops, and no cop loses a nickel, no matter what the judgment is, no matter what the settlement is. So there are absolutely no consequences for bad cops as a general rule. That's true everywhere across the country.
Are you testing the office, or do they test the officers there for the use of marijuana since it's legal there or some shit? Are they going?
You know, I don't know if they regularly test.
I'm teasing.
Don't know. But there was another scandal in Aurora this year where an Aurora cop in a police car was found passed out behind the steering wheel, too drunk to get out of his car. And the other cops showed up, all these body cams. As you all know, body cams are our best friends in court. Body cams have changed the landscape because, and I've said this repeatedly, it has now finally shown white middle America what people of color have dealt with for centuries. Police brutality hasn't increased. White awareness of police brutality has increased. due to body cams primarily and the pervasiveness of video cell phones. But anyway, we got the body cams, and this Aurora cop was so drunk he couldn't get out of his own car. He staggered out. They helped him out. They take him to the hospital. His blood alcohol is off the charts, but somehow they just never charge him with any crime. You know, I mean, it's outrageous what the whitewash machine that is internal affairs does, which is nothing except exonerate cops. That's the only function they have, is to exonerate cops and make it look like they're actually doing some actual investigation and they're actually going to do something about bad cops. They don't.
John Sweeney, please.
Yes, David, it's good to meet you. You're doing great works out there in Colorado.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Can you talk, David, about the deleterious effect that something like this has on police community relationship for generations, when you have a child who's pulled out of the car at gunpoint? That's something that's indelibly imprinted on her mind for the rest of her life. And what it does, it actually hurts the country, because Black people do not trust the police, haven't trusted the police for centuries because of events like this. Talk about for a second how you feel that this will affect police community relationship for generations to come.
Well, John, you hit it right on the head, and I couldn't agree more with you. You know, they say they are there to protect and serve, but they are there in the Black community in Aurora, which is Aurora has a very high percentage of African Americans. In fact, it's the one city in Colorado that is on pace to become the biggest city in Colorado in the near future, and it has the highest percentage of African Americans. They are not there to protect and serve. They are there to oppress and intimidate. They act like a colonial occupation force and not like your friendly neighborhood cop. I mean, white America grows up with this notion that, hey, if you're in trouble, call your friendly neighborhood police officer. They'll be there to help you. And people in communities of color never have that as the go-to, for good reason, because the response is just outrageous. There was a video a couple of years ago. I don't know if you ever saw it, but it was a test kind of a thing where they had a white guy walking down in the street in an open carry state carrying an AK-47 slung over his shoulder. And the cops predictably showed up and they walked over to him and they questioned him like, excuse me, but like, you got a reason to be carrying that? And he basically said, well, I'm exercising my rights under the Second Amendment. I don't have to give you any reasons. It's legal. The cop said, okay, see you, bye. They then gave that AK-47 to a Black man who was either very brave or very foolish. I don't know which. But he was walking down basically in the same area with the same AK-47, and 5 police cars come screaming to a halt, guns out. Get down, drop the weapon, drop the weapon. They cuff him, they kick his AK away from him. They roughed him up. I mean, it was ridiculous. But that is what we're talking about here. Why would they respond to a stolen vehicle filled with a bunch of little kids and their aunt, you know, doing nothing the way they do? In 40 years of practicing law, I've never seen this happen to a group of white people, ever. So what, John, where it goes is it kills any relationship between the police and the community for generations. These kids are going to grow up hating the cops, fearing the cops, and they're going to pass that on to their kids for good reason.
All due respect to you, why does white America look at Black men with this attitude?
It is a form of institutional racism. I mean, it is the culture. You know, look, 40% of America is, in my opinion, I mean, that's where Trump's approval rating has been through his entire term. I always used to say a third of America would vote for Hitler if given the chance. I was wrong. It's 40% of America. You know, it is racism that is generational. It's regional. And, you know, I mean, all any of us can do is continue the effort to fight it and never stop protesting it. And attitudes change. I do believe people change. But it takes time and effort by everyone. So Milton, that's an excellent question.
Attorney
And the
Banks, go
answer-
ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Lee, and thank you, Attorney Lane, for your the newly appointed police chief, Vanessa Wilson. She, as you know, is a 20-year veteran of the police department, and she initially quoted the high-risk stop protocol. But when she was alerted to this situation involving your clients, she stated that she was outraged. She apologized and stated that her officers should have exercised more discretion with respect to this specific set of circumstances. Do you have any hope that she will make any progress with reforming what sounds like a obvious systemic culture within the police department and system in Aurora and throughout Colorado? And it's a big question. How do you dismantle and change years of militaristic indoctrination, this dehumanizing culture in police organization against a group of people? How do you begin to make steps in changing that?
Excellent question. You know, I like to quote those great British philosophers from the last century, Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey, who many of you may not be familiar with, but they are the Who. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss, as far as I'm concerned, until she proves otherwise. She did make a statement, though, that gives me no hope. She said, well, now that I'm the chief of police, the culture in this department has changed. And I laughed. She's been in that department for 20 years. She doesn't know any other culture. She grew up in that culture. And culture doesn't change just because the chief snaps his or her fingers. It is inbred into the police mentality. You know, I mean, let's go back to George Floyd. Chauvin is kneeling on his neck. People are standing there videoing him, begging him, please get off his neck. The guy can't breathe. The guy can't breathe. Do you for 1 minute think about, like, what would have happened if somebody had rushed Chauvin from the crowd and just shoved him off of George Floyd's neck? Do you know what would have happened to that guy? He would have either been shot and killed, or he'd be looking at assault on a police officer, felony charges, looking at serious prison time for shoving Chauvin off George Floyd's neck. What would have happened to another cop just standing around? You know, Chauvin is the main bad guy in that case. These other cops, I call them, you know, I always say there are a few good apples in every department. And by that, I mean, most cops don't wake up in the morning and think, I'm going to go out and break some skulls today. I'd really like doing that. Most cops aren't that way. Most cops don't think, oh, you know, I'm going to go out and violate the Constitution as often as I can today. But most cops are, in fact, enablers. Most cops turn a blind eye and turn their backs and write false reports and test a lie in court. They don't testify truthfully. They test a lie to back up their brothers and sisters who are constitutional violators and violent cops. That's the culture. Because if you go out and start ratting out your fellow officers for violating the Constitution, when you need a little backup because you're in a tight spot with some guy who's bigger than you and wants to fight you, maybe the people that you're depending on aren't going to be there because they're looking at you like you're a snitch. That's the culture. And the culture of the enablers has to change. You know, you got to weed out the violent, you got to weed out the constitutional violators, but the enablers are the real problem. And that's why I say there are only a few good apples in every department, because the vast majority of departments are filled with enablers.
Hey, now we have about a dozen callers. Let's just see, can we take one caller that's on point? Okay, caller, we'll take one caller at this time, producer. Hello? Hello, caller, you have a question for us?
This is Oliver. I'm on the mic.
You're there, Ms. Oliver. What's your question?
About the immunity. The guest speaker there, I'd like to know if there are any other municipalities in the that where the police that officer that's convicted or charged ever had to absorb the fines or the penalties that's sorted out rather than the taxpayer. That and their collective bargaining agreement that's signed by usually by the mayor and his staff. They negotiate that, and seems like the police departments across the country, including Indianapolis, have become another branch of government. They come under the three branches, the judiciary branch, but they are separate into themselves, that us taxpayers hire them, and over the years they develop to the point where they're telling you and I what they're going to do, what they're not going to do, and we're endangering their lives if we try to have some oversight or transparency. At the same time, we're threatened that if we don't get what we want, all of a sudden they get the blue flu, slow response, as the speaker acknowledged earlier. I'd like to hear him speak to that point about this immunity that they have, and is it in effect anywhere in the country to where they've addressed that, and it showed a different type of response from the police officers' relationship with the community.
Well, I certainly appreciate that question. That's a very good question. And as I said, this law in Colorado is the first law anywhere that I know of where the cops may actually have to reach into their paychecks and pay some damages for violating the Constitution. We'll see how all that works. But, you know, the system is corrupt in so many ways from top to bottom. And the caller correctly points this out. I mean, in many, many states, I don't know what it is in Indiana, but if there is a direct election of judges, you know, where people are running for office, running for judicial office, like they do in Texas, you know, you don't get elected by standing proudly on your record of enforcing the Constitution and throwing stuff out when the cops violate it. That's not how you get elected. You get elected by being tough on crime and backing the police. And if the police union doesn't back you for a judicial job, the voters don't want to vote for you. So that is one aspect of change that has to occur from the top. The worst idea ever is the direct election of judges by the people, because the people don't understand and they don't know. Colorado has a system where a commission, a bipartisan commission, takes all applications. They narrow the field to 3 applicants, and then the governor chooses one of the 3. And then after 7 years, the voters give a thumbs up or a thumbs down based primarily on recommendations by the bar associations as to whether the judge should be retained. That's a much better system because it's not completely dependent upon approval by the police to get a judicial position. You know, and the other issue that is stacked against people is this notion, and this is under heavy assault in the federal courts right now. The whole thing, there's a thing out there called qualified immunity. And what that means is even if the cops violate the Constitution, if there's no case decided by the US Supreme Court or the Circuit Court of Appeal where this occurred that is pretty much directly on point, even though the courts would say, yeah, there was a constitutional violation here, but the law is not clearly established, the case gets dismissed. The Colorado law eliminates that loophole. That is a judge-created loophole. The Supreme Court created that loophole back in the 70s. And it was a conservative Supreme Court that created that loophole for cops. And that has to go if there's ever going to be enforcement. So there also needs to be an independent prosecutor in every state that prosecutes law enforcement when they break the law. Because right now it's up to local DAs who are in bed with the cops on every case they have in their office. The local cops bring them. And now you're asking those DAs to prosecute their good buddies in the local cop shop. And that's never going to happen. You need an independent agency to review police misconduct. You need an independent prosecutor to go after bad cops. That has to happen in order for this corrupt system to ever change.
Okay, Attorney Sweeney.
Yeah, David is absolutely right. We had a whole show a couple weeks back on this program on qualified immunity. Yeah, that's a big problem, obviously. But I want to echo something that David just said, because I do a lot of these cases, Nathaniel, out here in Los Angeles, and along with Milton also. And David is absolutely right. The system is corrupt from top to bottom. And David mentioned the Internal Affairs Bureau, the IAB. They are the police who police the police. And I uncovered out here a group of deputies in the Compton Sheriff Station who are similarly tattooed, and they are wreaking havoc on the city of Compton. They run this group of deputies run the Compton precinct of the Sheriff's Department. And I found out that one of these deputies who became a whistleblower actually reported an assault by one of these tattooed deputies against another deputy who didn't want to join this clique gang. And he called an anonymous hotline within the Sheriff's Department. And within 24 hours, it was to the Internal Affairs Bureau. Within 24 hours, the Internal Affairs Bureau had ratted him out back to the station, and he got tremendous reprisal from that. And so when the police who are policing the police, the Internal Affairs Bureau, are crooked, and the homicide detectives from the Sheriff's Department or the agency that did the shooting, their homicide detectives come out and investigate and manipulate the witnesses and evidence and everything. By the time the district attorney gets the case, the homicide detectives have manipulated evidence. Internal Affairs Bureau has covered things up. By the time they send it over to the district attorney's office for prosecution, it looks like a justifiable shooting. So from top to bottom, it's stacked against prosecuting these officers. That's a huge problem.
But I agree, if I may interject, Nathan? Okay, I agree we need to do something different than what we're doing if we're going to rectify this problem here. Because the police union, the officers know that the union is going to be behind them for whatever they do, and there's no consequence for what they do. And if there is, it's years down the line. Jackie Lacey here in LA is investigating a couple of cases of mine, even in one of them where the 5 officers were fired by the city 4 years ago. And they haven't prosecuted the case yet. They're still investigating. This police union is a sort of like a mafia over elected officials. And if we don't separate that control of elected officials or governmental leaders, we're going to have this problem forever. They're a strong union, and they run our elected officials.
I'm a union guy. I support unions, but I totally agree with you, Milton. The police union, they will back any cop for any reason, no matter how bad they are, and they run the show. In Colorado, in Denver, and in the other major cities, internal affairs, if on the off chance a cop is found to have done something wrong and they get disciplined, Denver, for example, has fired several officers recently. And then they have super due process once they get fired. There isn't a commission, an alleged independent commission. The problem with the independent commission is it's appointed by the mayor, who then stacks it with ex-cops. who then review the termination, and these cops always get their jobs back. And Denver is then able to look at the voters with a straight face and say, hey, we fired this guy. It's that commission that put him back on the job. And the voters are like, who's the commission? What's the commission? What? Well, Denver fired him, so they did everything they could. But it's a stacked deck. You know, I've always said, John, when the police investigate the police, it always works out pretty well for the police.
Yep.
You know?
You know, also, David, Milton, Benita, and Nathaniel, here's an angle that most people don't look at. Milton can attest to this, that once you file a lawsuit seeking recompense against these police departments, their lawyers jump right on and cover things up and advise their clients to lie. They suborn perjury. And we know this, Milton. It happens all the time. And so you're really, really fighting an uphill battle in trying to bring these cops to justice.
That's why I say body cams are our best friend in court, because when they get on the stand and test a lie, the video is the video. And
I used to believe that too, but when a cop is prosecuted, he walks into court with 100% assumption or presumption of innocence.
Yep. And
I've seen the cases where the video clearly showed unadulterated excessive force, serious excessive force by an officer, and 2 jurors would hang that guilt.
you were involved in Rodney King, right, Milton?
No, this is a recent case that I had with that Rodney King too. But we want to, some people out there will not accept a cop doing anything wrong.
There is a huge love of cop when we go into court. You know, up until body cams, you know, if it was just the word of my client versus the word of a couple of cops, I'd say, look, I believe everything you're telling me, but we have a 0% chance of winning because there is such a huge love of cop when you go into court. That love of cop is diminishing. I see it in my practice every day. You know, we're getting verdicts now in federal court that we never got before. And we get these verdicts when body cams are shown to the jurors. You know, it really is. I mean, George Floyd's protests are the best evidence that attitudes are changing. I mean, this has been going on for centuries, as you guys said. There haven't been protests. And when you look out at these protesters, they are black, white, brown. You know, it's the Rainbow Coalition out there protesting. I really believe the times are a-changing.
Yes, they are. And we better catch this window of change.
Attorney Banks, what were you getting ready to say?
Absolutely. I agree with everything that has been said. And just wanted to add, David, that the Colorado statute abolishing qualified immunity and imposing accountability on abusive police officers is a great start, and that law should be replicated across the nation. Secondly, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act passed by the U.S. House of Representatives would also abrogate and abolish qualified immunity. And we are advocating that the Senate adopt the House bill, or at least pass a bill which would, if there are differences, which there will be because there was a very weak bill introduced by Senator Tim Scott, that a conference committee be established to reconcile a bill that would include this qualified immunity, which is silent currently in the Senate bill. And third, the National Bar Association's call to action includes several recommendations to reform policing here in America, including at the top of the list, abolishing the qualified immunity defense, which currently serves to protect abusive police officers, and as David mentioned, establishing independent prosecutors in police abuse cases, as well as adopting many of the recommendations in President Obama's 21st century policing reform and recommendations report, which would recommence the monitoring that and consent decrees in several cities, including one that had been implemented here in the Chicagoland area.
Okay, let me get one caller, and then I get to John Sweeney. Hey, caller, you got a quick question for us today?
I guess go ahead to be quick, I guess. Okay.
Well, thanks for holding for the last 25 minutes. I'm
yeah.
sorry that everybody had to wait so long. I apologize, but we have a busy program. Go ahead. What's your question, Jeff?
Well, I had three, but I guess I had to cut it down to one. But anyway, I mean, really, after the police themselves is almost an oxymoron. You know, it ain't going to happen. And what I want to talk to you, Milton, is about the situation in Indianapolis where you had these officers, one of them, well, two have been indicted, I guess, for that Gestapo-like tactic they used on those two women. And I guess, you know, why does it take so long? Okay, and I think the mayor of Atlanta got it right with the incident in Atlanta with the young man was shot in the back. They were immediately terminated. I mean, we see it. I mean, Indianapolis is so medieval. It's really pathetic. But what I'm trying to say is, you know, we got to hit all fronts. The voting block, because what we're dealing with now, we're on the verge of fascism. All right? I mean, that's where we're at right now. I mean, we got police that are basically using Gestapo-like tactics, especially against communities of color. It's the thin blue line. It's the police shooting. They're the problem. The good cops will enable the bad cops because they don't want to be viewed as a snitch. And you're talking maybe a good cinch of this mindset. So we just got to, and I am so proud of Black Lives Matter, and I'm going to say something very controversial. I'm proud of Antifa, too. So that might be getting me barred off the show. I do support Antifa because somebody going to let these bigots know that, you know, this is 2020, not 1920. You'll have a good day.
Well, one quick thing you need to know, caller, is that we have a very good prosecutor locally, Ryan Mears, and he took aggressive action, and those cops are being prosecuted. However, in terms of qualified immunity for the first caller, Indianapolis now has the worst qualified immunity defense case in the country. The case is Dave versus City of Indianapolis, and we're going to take it to U.S. Supreme Court, where Indianapolis officially authorized torture of a suspect who has surrendered. So in other words, the rule in our city is that officers were allowed to torture a suspect for over 22 minutes and suffocate him and let him die on the streets while in handcuffs. And so they got away with it. The case is dismissed under the civil rights violation and is one of the most egregious cases ever. But in any event, John Sweeney, go ahead.
Yeah, to put a ribbon and a bow on this discussion of police reform, of abolishing qualified immunity, of straightening out police departments and unions and things like that. Yes, we have to do that, but here's the real root of the problem. And we've talked about this. It's racism, because these things are only happening
No, it's white supremacy.
to black people and brown people. You know, you can change the laws all you want, but it's still black people and brown people, mostly black people, get the brunt of police misconduct. We have a society that is majority white, yet it's black people that are always get the violation of the civil rights, of their civil rights. So what we have to do is, it's a broader problem. It's a deeper problem than just the laws and the police department. It's racism. It's the black man that is the subject of, we are the whipping boys, always have been, for this country. From lynchings, people come and bring picnic baskets and watch black people being lynched. It's racism, pure and simple, and that has to change if we are going to move forward in this country.
Mr. Lee, you gave me an assignment last week, and I'm ready to report back on that assignment that addresses what John said and what we're talking about, and that
Go
is
ahead.
the Washington Supreme Court. In their manifesto of June the 4th, 2020, part of their manifesto said the devaluation and degradation of Black lives is not a recent event. It is a persistent and systemic injustice that predates this nation's founding. But recent events have brought to the forefront of our collective consciousness a painful fact that is, for too many of our citizens' common knowledge, the injustices faced by Black Americans are not relics of the past. We continue to see racialized policing and overrepresentation of Black Americans in every stage of our criminal and juvenile justice systems. Our institutions remain affected by the vestiges of slavery, Jim Crow laws that were never dismantled, and racist court decisions that were never disavowed. Last month, that was June the 4th, 2020, and it goes on. Mr. Lane, I don't know if you've seen this, but I've forced this on Ms. Banks and Mr. Sweeney and Lee. They have started to act on their manifesto. Although it's not the biggest act, they have started to act. They have 9 justices that signatured this, that went with this. In July, I think it was, I don't remember the date now, I think it's July the 15th, Nate, he did go back to a 1915 case that denied a Native American fishing in a river that was under the treaty. The fishing rights of Native Americans under the treaty were protected. But the county council prosecutor filed charges against this person for fishing illegally in waters that he couldn't fish in, even though for thousands of years, these people had fished there. So the Supreme Court went back last month and overturned that decision. So I know it's not the biggest star in the sky, but it's an effort by this Supreme Court to change, to adjust wrongs that have been made by the court throughout this history. So it's a start of on high, trickling on down, hopefully, that we will get some recognition and respect for all lives in the court system, and especially African Americans.
I totally agree with that. And what's very interesting is since George Floyd's death, various courts have been saying things that they would have never said prior to that. You just read one example. The Missouri Supreme Court in a totally, I don't even remember what the case was. It was like a contracts case or something. There was a citation to a very racist opinion from the Missouri Supreme Court back in the 30s, where the Missouri Supreme Court rendered this completely racist decision. And apparently one of the two parties in this litigation cited that case in their brief. And the Missouri Supreme Court said, look, that was a racist decision by a racist court. We not only disavow that decision, we are hereby prohibiting any party from ever citing that case ever again.
Wow.
The Missouri Supreme
I
Court.
love it.
There was another case out of the federal district court in Mississippi recently where a judge in Mississippi, a federal district court judge in Mississippi.
Judge Carlton Reed.
Yeah, yes, Judge Reed. I'm sure you may have read that opinion. I mean, he goes on.
The Judicial Council of the National Bar.
That's great. You know, I mean, he wrote a ringing condemnation of qualified immunity and gave the history of police brutality and racism in recent times. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which used to be the worst circuit court of appeals in America, as far as I was concerned. It was tied between the Fourth and the Fifth, which is the Deep South. You know, the Fourth now is a great court because Obama put good judges on it. They had an opinion recently where they also go through chapter and verse about recent, brutality by the police. And they say, this has got to stop.
You have to stop. That's what the court said in the Jones.
Chief Justice Roger Gregory, another member of the National Bar. Right. He's part of the Judicial Council.
So hopefully these are more than just empty words on paper. Hopefully they mean it. Hopefully there is an actual change occurring in America and all the protests across the country. I mean, I could not believe You know,
Well, I have said to the staff, to the panel here, Mr. Lane, I'm taking this into court with me from now on and said, Your Honor, are you on page with this? I want to ask them, are you on page with this?
Powerful strategy.
Yeah.
But,
No doubt.
but you
Milton Grimes is known for his outstanding, groundbreaking, innovative, creative trial lawyer. Milton, that would be right in line with your past cases and past performances.
I'm serious.
We'll take one caller now. Caller, you have a question for us today?
Yes. I just want to say it's an excellent show, and it should be replicated as much as possible. The problem is the average citizen does not believe what you have said today. And somehow this has to be out to the public. It's just like a debate. You've got to get your point across to the audience. And a lot of times the audience is the fact that it doesn't happen to people that are in the majority. It only happens to people in the minority. This is the problem. And who wins the day is the person who can get this across to the public. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, caller, we're up over 100,000 listeners now. We're on Facebook and on 10 social media and locally on the internet. So, you know, the shows are expanding. Hopefully we get over 1 million by the end of the year. So we are marketing the show and we'll get over 1 million by the end of the year. I guarantee you that. So just make sure you let your friends know about the show. And then when you go to Facebook, you can repost it on your Facebook account, okay?
But it has to be unlike the major media, which the average person, say, in Podunk, USA, can understand what it's all about. Because a lot of times it might not happen to them. So when terms are used like defund the police, it's a political term. The opponents can use that word and say, well, they want to abolish the police, which everybody would say that this is ridiculous. So you have to be careful about the words that you use and understand that you have to get it across to the majority of the people.
Hey, Attorney Banks, you need to respond to that about the fund because you gave an excellent response on that before.
Well, I agree with the caller that that words matter. And when we talk about, there's 3 trends that have occurred with respect to that have emerged in this conversation around police reform. One is reform policing, and defund police has been used to as a descriptor as well as abolishing police altogether. And I believe that when we talk about defunding police, we're not talking about eliminating police. I think most people would agree with that, although there have been some local jurisdictions that are reimagining policing in this nation. And Minneapolis did pass a bill that would abolish policing over time. But the term defunding police refers to reallocating resources. For example, the LA Police 2021 police budget is $1.8 billion, and that's over half of the city's total budget for the entire year. New York's annual police budget is over $6 billion, and that's more than the city spends on homelessness, health, workforce development, and youth, all combined. And so there has been a proposal in New York that would reduce the budget by just $1 billion over the next 4 years. And the objective is that one objection to defunding is that, or reallocation is probably the better term, is that it would increase crime. But investing in the community, and this is a strong counter argument, actually will reduce crime. And there are statistics that show that when you increase wages and when educational opportunities are increased, that there's approximately 10 to 20% reduction in crime rates. So it's reallocating funds that are currently allocated for policing to other areas into the right professionals, because many of the calls that police respond to, for example, deal with mental illness, deal with homelessness. And so it's not about defunding the police, taking away police funding, but appropriately reallocating it to the right resources to address the community's needs.
Well, thank you. That's a really good explanation. And but Attorney Grimes, you have a few parting comment. We're down to the last 3 minutes, so your closing comments.
Well, you know, in line with what Ms. Banks said, LA, I think is allocating 150,000, 100. What is it, John? I think it's 150,000 of the police budget this year is being put into the community, but it has to be more than 150,000. You remember that figure, John Sweeney?
I'm sorry, the what, Milton?
That the LA is taken from the police budget and allocating it to the community here in LA.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe Banks can give me the number, but they're allocating a small portion of the police budget to the community. And I think, like Ms. Banks just said, programs have shown that when you give them money to help the community, it does cut down violence, it makes people more gainfully employed, and it promotes education. And we need this money to go in that direction. I think our police departments are overfunded and they're well-heeled and their pension programs are intact. We need to start looking at those budgets.
Okay, quick closing argument, Mr. Sweeney.
Yes. Let's make it clear that most people who say defund the police don't mean that we should get rid of the police, because we need the police. There are people out there who mean you no good, and they would take advantage if there were no police officers of innocent people. We need the police. However, what we need to, like Vanita Banks just said, reallocate it, because a majority of the calls for policing and calls for service are calls involving mentally ill people doing something, domestic violence, accosting people on the street. I won't say a majority of the calls, but a lot of the calls. So we need psychologists, sociologists, and teams that perhaps can roll with police officers and interdict crime in that way and diffuse things instead of police coming in and shooting, because that's what they're trained to do. They're trained to arrest people. Some of these people don't need to be arrested, they need help. And so I think that Vanita is absolutely right. We need to reallocate some of the funds that are being used to militarize the police. We need those funds to be redirected towards sociologists and psychologists.
Attorney Banks, we got 30 seconds.
For me? Did you say, oh, Banks, okay.
Well, I would like to continue this discussion on defunding the police and the discussion that we've been having with David today. I'd like to hear more about what the status is with respect to Elijah McClain, as well as I just wanted to say that I'm very encouraged by Senator Kamala Harris's nomination as Vice President Biden's running mate this week. And thank you for having me on your wonderful show.
Well, what we're going to do is that we're out of time now, audience, from our radio transmission, and we'll continue this discussion next week. Unfortunately, my producers say that we ran out of time. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you in our local audience, our international audience, our statewide, nationwide audience. Thank you for listening to our show. Thank you, callers. I apologize that we weren't able to get to all your calls today, and we'll try to pick up next week and try to get some of the folks who are on hold for most of the show. We'll try to get you in first next week. Thank you and stay safe, and God bless you until we talk again. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.